a special guest here today, Sherry Knowles. Sherry's been in town the last couple days here at our annual Life Sciences program. And since she was here at IPWatchdog, I thought it would be a good opportunity to have a one-on-one conversation with her about, well, pretty much anything she wants to talk about. We'll talk about some of the stuff that came up at the Life Sciences program, some things that are going on Capitol Hill. We'll talk about brand name drugs, generic drugs, and just whatever comes up. Welcome, Sherry. It's a pleasure to have you here.
I'm so glad to be here. What a wonderful 2 days we've had. It's been great. As usual, IPWatchdog Life Sciences has not ceased to amaze us. We've had great panels, and not only that, we've had great attendees. The attendees are as smart and interesting as the panelists, and I've had a great time just talking to all the people who are here about lots of issues, and they go deep and deep and deep, and made a lot of new friends.
That's one of the things I really enjoy about the programs that we put on together, and maybe it's because we do really get a high-level crowd here, and we're able to get really into the weeds with some great practitioners, a lot of in-house counsel, and the conversations I thought were really productive. But before we get too far down that path, I really probably should give you a bit more of an introduction. I assume everybody just knows Sherry Knowles, and that probably is the case, at least in our industry. But Sherry is the principal and founding partner at Knowles Intellectual Property Strategies, and she, among many other claims to fame, was Vice President and Chief Patent Counsel at GlaxoSmithKline at a time when she took the role of challenging the patent office. I knew you were going to win.
No one else did.
Nobody else did. You really carried the laboring oar for the whole industry to save us from what was then a really bad idea. It still would be a bad idea if it came up today. It was to limit the number of continuations and limit the number of claims. And maybe we could start there. I mean, philosophically, and this came up a couple times over the last couple days, mostly I'm bringing this up because I look at this patent system holistically, and it just feels like those people that are against the patent system, not in favor of strong patents, they have outside voices in DC. They have, some of them have, it seems like, limitless budget to influence policy, to fund what I would call specious research, that isn't correct. But there seems to just be this cascading and maybe collapsing or imploding is the right way to describe it, of the patent. And I thought what we were supposed to do was encourage groundbreaking innovation through the patent system. And particularly when you look at the life sciences area, why in God's name would you ever want to limit the number of patents or the number of claims? These are the precise types of innovations that we want. We want more of them, not less of them. And it just seems so counterintuitive what's going on in the patent space. What do you think?
Well, it's counterintuitive, but it's been going on for a long time. Mm-hmm. As you said, the rules case is almost ancient history at this point. That happened about 20 years ago. And we did have the same kind of forces talking about limiting continuations, limiting patents, limiting the innovation space. And yeah, it's hard to imagine because all of us may get sick one day. All of us, may have friends who are sick. We have friends or family, and we're going to need innovator drugs. One thing that we really haven't given enough time to or space to is the life cycle of a generic drug. Okay, and I think that we should talk about that because I think it's very eye-opening. And we talked about it a little bit, but when you have a generic drug, let's just talk about pharmaceutical drugs. So we're under that regime, we're talking about the Hatch-Waxman Act and the litigation. So you'll have a potentially groundbreaking drug, maybe an anti-cancer drug, or a new drug for hypertension, or any of the host of new drugs we have out there. And what do the generics do? They initially try to start coming up with all of their strategies of how they're going to be the first one to file an ANDA case against that innovator drug. And for those of you who may not be as familiar with the Hatch-Waxman Act, on the fourth year, the anniversary of the fourth year of approval, generics can file a ANDA, and there's a bounty that's put on the head of a pharmaceutical patent, and that is the 180-day exclusivity. So if it's a really good drug, you're going to have a number of generics filing on that first day, which is the 180-day period, which is the 4-year period. And then at the end, they'll get to split the 180 days of exclusivity, which we'll talk about in a second. But that then starts a Hatch-Waxman type litigation. And you get all the people that you're talking about who are saying, yay, we're in favor of breaking these patents. Let's have cheap prices. Let's have cheap prices. Let's let the generics win. We're all on the side of that. We'll have the press following the generics as they're trying to invalidate the innovator patents. Well, if, let's say, worst case scenario, okay, the patents are broken, or they live their life and then at the end they get the 180 days. So what happens? Typically, for that first 180 days, the price goes down maybe by about 80% of what the innovator drug is, and there may be several generics in the market then. But the key is what happens after that 180 days. After that 180 days, lots of generics just start filling the market. And I call that the race to the bottom. Okay, because as soon as all these generics come in and start selling the drugs, the prices get cut further and further and further down. And I say that's the race to the generic graveyard. Because once they start doing that, right, they decide to stop selling. And the FDA has a list on its website. I mean, I encourage everybody to go look at it because it's so eye-opening. This is the generic graveyard. And the generic graveyard is just the race to the bottom because the prices have been cut too low. And for right now, there are 89 generic drugs on the list of critical supply. And these are really important drugs. These are anti-cancer drugs. These are anti-infectives. And they're either in critical supply or not being supplied now. And it's actually because of this system that allows early litigation, breaking the patents or allowing all the generics to come in. So what do we end up with, the life cycle of the generic drug? We end up with drugs in the graveyard, and these are wonderful drugs. So we're either in critical supply, and I actually have some of these here just to let your audience hear some of the names of the drugs that are in the FDA graveyard, okay? 24 anti-infectives and 21 oncology drugs. For the anti-infectives, you're talking about amoxicillin powder, azithromycin injection, bacitracin ointment, clindamycin has been discontinued by some companies, erythromycin gel, vancomycin, which is for drug-resistant bacteria. There are 21 oncology drugs, which are listed by the FDA as in critical supply or not available. Bendamustine, bleomycin, carboplatin injection, dexamethasone, which is in short supply, of course it's still available, doxytaxel, gemcitabine, irinotecan, leucovorin was just resolved, oxaliplatin. These are all the drugs which are critical to our healthcare system. And the prices are so low that there's just not enough motivation to make it. And that's when you learn that generic companies want to make a profit too.
Yeah, they're
right?
capitalists as
they're
well.
Capitalists. They're capitalists.
Not surprising they chase the drugs that most people take, and including those that you have to take every day for long periods of time. And if it is a extremely necessary drug that actually may cure you, like some of these oncology drugs, you probably need them for a period of time, and then hopefully you don't need them again. Or even if you goes into remission, the cancer goes into remission and comes back, you hopefully won't need it for years.
Yeah.
So it's not the same return. And we live in this world where we think we should bend over backwards for generics, but there's just because a brand name drug falls off patent does not guarantee that there will be a generic. Now, often there is, and probably generally there is, at least for a period of time, but it's not 100%. And not only that, like one of the other things that came up over the last few days that just bothers me so much is this idea that people will say, oh, you get 40, 50, 60 years worth of protection. No, you don't. That is a lie. That just doesn't happen. And if there's a patent attorney out there that can figure out how to get 60 years of protection for a brand name drug, you would be the richest person in the history of the world, right? It doesn't happen. What happens is you get a patent on a drug, and then all the early drugs, you can make them better, right? Some of them will have side effects. Some will have side effects you didn't even anticipate. So the next iteration is same efficacy, less side effects. Well, what do people want? They want that one. You know, so the fact that they want that one, that may prevent a generic from going in and selling the one that they could sell for practically for free.
Right.
You know, and those are business choices that these generics make. And I just think it's ridiculous to try and incentivize killing these patents for the real innovators. And, you know, maybe I'd feel differently if the generics were playing a vital role in making sure we had critically necessary drugs.
Right.
But that they don't.
But they don't.
They don't.
No, they don't. No, they don't. There is the race to the bottom. There's the generic graveyard, which you don't hear about, and then they go on to the next drug, and then they just suck the money out of that drug when the innovator is finished, and then it goes into the graveyard. So that's the kind of thing we have. And we also have, as you pointed out, and we talked about over the past 2 days, so much misinformation that's floating through. You know, it's, let's be honest, patents are difficult to understand. You know, many times you have to go to law school, you have to be trained in it, you have to be a patent agent, or maybe take the patent agent exam. Most people in the United States do not understand the patent system. Most people, and I'd say almost all people, don't understand how drugs are paid for. They don't understand the pharmacy benefit manager system. They don't understand where they're, when they pay for a drug, where does that money go? And it's so complicated that the easiest thing to say is, oh, it's the fault of the patents. It's much more complicated than that. And I think one of the I think things that we need to be doing is transparency, giving transparency to the American people and giving it to them in a way that, and I don't even want to say dumbed down, because I think you can assume the American people are smart, but they just want it simple and straightforward. And they want the facts, almost like bullet point. What are the facts? Yeah. What's going on? If you ask somebody, if you went into a grocery store, somebody who just picked up their prescription and said, when you paid for that prescription, do you know who you were paying? I don't think anybody would know. Well,
no. Well, let's put some meat on those bones here and give an example. So if your script costs you $100, where you go to CVS, Walgreens, Wegmans, wherever you get your scripts filled, out of that $100, up to $50 is going to go to these PBMs, who are the people in the middle, who didn't sell you the drug, didn't fill the prescription, and who didn't innovate or go through FDA trials or anything. So what winds up happening is the innovator who spent all this time and energy to carry this drug over the finish line, to prove it was efficacious through stage 0, 1, 2, 3 trials with the FDA to get a thumbs up, they're going to make less than half. And they're making less than the middleman.
Yeah.
And then there's, of course, has to be something left over for the Walgreens or CVS or Wegmans or whoever filled the script. So the people who make the most out of this did nothing to create or sell you the drug. And that, when I found that out, I thought to myself, my God, that's just ridiculous. I mean, that's just crazy. And which is why I do think, and I know right now in D.C., President Trump and the Trump administration, they've come up with this most favored nation stuff. They're trying to negotiate, and they've already signed some deals with a few drug makers and so forth. But if they really, really want to bring down pharmaceutical prices, they can. And they can do it, I think, relatively quickly by addressing that PBM issue. Now, they don't ask for my advice, but what I would say is, like, if you Republicans want to go into the midterms with wind behind your back, do something about PBMs and bring everybody's drug prices down. And so to me, it seems like that's probably what's going to happen, because it can happen, and it can make a real difference.
These PBMs need to be sued extensively under the antitrust laws. It's clear vertical integration. We have the big three that have 80% of the drug dispensing power, and they're making all the money, as you said. And that is really important. One of the slides that I showed over the past 2 days was just the risk versus benefit equation. Okay, if anybody thought about the pharmaceutical research industry, and instead of saying drug, use the word widget, okay, and say how many people would put their money in to developing a widget that takes 10 to 12 years to make, and you don't even know if you're going to be able to sell it till you get a letter from the government in the mail that says, yes, we're going to let you sell that, or no, we're not going to let you sell that. And it's going to cost probably hundreds of millions, maybe $1 billion to get to the point that you'll get a letter from the government that tells you whether you can sell it or not. And then if you've done that, what are you? You're out of pocket for like 8 to 10 years. And don't think about drug, think about a widget, okay? And actually, I gave a talk, I don't know, years ago at Harvard Law School about this scenario. And I said, let's say your rich uncle just left you some money, and you had to pick an industry to go into because you thought you were a great innovator, a great developer. So you're going to make a widget. You decide to take all this money, put it in on the widgets. You've got to borrow money. You might have to go into the public market. You might have to issue stock. Then at the end, in a 10 to 12 year period, then you just get a letter in the mail from the government, yes, you're okay or not. If you are, that's day one. You're still at a loss. You've lost all that money for 8 to 10 years. Then after that, you start to make money. Now, of course, when you enter the market, you don't all of a sudden get a windfall of all that money. It is a bell curve. So you start entering the market, it goes in, and you don't actually reach just reimbursing yourself for years. And then when you reimburse yourself, now when you put on top of that, you call that now, as we're saying, a drug. But so that's all risk, no profit for 8 to 10 years. Then when you get to the 10-year period, and if you're lucky enough to get this like little nice letter from the government that says, okay, we're going to let you sell your widget, okay, then all of a sudden it's all profit, no risk. And that's when the pharmacy benefit managers come in. They lick their lips and go like this, and the big three come in, and they've got vertical integration where they're each taking a cut of the drug price. And they're coming in, and the drug manufacturer, who has done all this work to get up to it, now immediately gets met by the pharmacy benefit manager system, the government system, criticism, not praise, from the public. And then on top of that, after that, it gets the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. Yep. So then you go, after that, 7 or 9 years, we may be at the point where the company has not even gotten reimbursed yet of all of its investment, before the Inflation Reduction Act hits, which for small molecules would be, the 7 years with implementation at 9 years. It's insane. You have to ask yourself, who would actually ever enter that market?
No, well, yeah, it is. Given the risk, given the high failure rate, given the unpredictability of the science, it is. Thank God there are people who do enter that market, but it is not for the faint of heart. And it should be simple for everybody to understand, right? If you don't have strong exclusivity for an appropriate period of time, then the innovator is always going to lose to those people who come in and are just, you can call them generics, you call them copycats, whatever you want to call them, but whoever comes in and can just take what the innovators created is always going to wind up making more. It's because they don't have to pay for the R&D that went into that. They don't have to pay for all the failures because they didn't have any failures. In generics, that's the other thing with generics. Generics don't have failures because they only copy the stuff that makes money. They only copy the stuff that's successful. They only copy the blockbusters. And, you know, and I also think an important point here, too, that we kind of, I think, danced around over a couple days. It didn't come up directly, but that the spend on drugs only accounts for about 12% of the overall healthcare spending. And I think the reason that people focus on that is when you do go to Walgreens or CVS or wherever to get it filled, they tell you, okay, this is how much it is, this is how much your insurance covered, this is what you still owe us. And when you go to the doctor, the insurance happens behind the curtain. When you go to the hospital, it largely is behind the curtain. And there's not a lot of transparency, so people don't know where their healthcare dollar goes, but you can see where your prescription dollar is costing you. You don't know where it maybe goes and who it goes to, but that's the upfront cost, and that's the one that everybody points to and complains about, when in fact 88% of every other dollar that's spent in the healthcare industry goes on somewhere else. I mean, that's where the money for the government to be pushing for saving is. And then the last thing, and I know I've heard Corey Salzberg on our stage in this podcast has also talked about this issue is one of their drugs that got caught into this quote-unquote negotiation, which is really the government saying take it or leave it pricing. Because if you don't take it, you're ruinous fines, like billions and billions of dollars of fines. One of their drugs is for treating heart disease and keeping people out of the hospital. And we should want to keep people out of hospitals to the greatest extent that we can. And this is not to say anything bad about hospitals. We need them. They need to be there. But they're full of sick people. And when you go to the hospital, it doesn't stretch the imagination to believe that, well, hey, I may go in and have something wrong with my hip, and while I'm there, I may catch the flu.
I may come out with more than what I went in with.
You may come out more than you went in with, absolutely, 100%, and including some, unfortunately, some antibiotic-resistant infections.
Yeah.
And that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
And we should be spending energy, time, regulating time, legislating time in D.C. to beg, borrow, and plead to get the next round of antibiotics, when in fact, this is a good segue to the patent eligibility. There was, 10, 12 years ago, researchers found something that just naturally occurred in soil, had extraordinarily promising properties. It was potentially the next super antibiotic that actually did treat all these antibiotic-resistant strains, and they were not even able to get a patent on it because it violated the law of nature. Now, I suppose that was probably technically, based on the law where we're at right now, the right decision legally, but it was completely the wrong decision for society. And Congress,
I would actually argue it was the wrong decision even
well,
back
I mean,
then.
I think it was,
wrong legal decision
I think
back then.
I would have thought it would be the wrong legal. Well, the reason I say that is because 101 has become such a so bastardized compared to what it once was, right? If you purified something back in the day, it was no longer naturally occurring.
Right.
But now today, purification isn't enough. I mean, so where are we with 101?
Yeah.
And maybe that gets us into the discussion about what the legislation.
Sure. And I think we need to go back to our roots. You know, our country is based on a fundamental framework, which is the U.S. Constitution. That's like the framing of our house, and we can't ignore that. In the Constitution, it uses the word discoveries, okay? And in the 1952 Patent Act, it refers to inventions or discoveries in the disjunctive, okay? Invention or discoveries, not inventions which are not discoveries. You know, it didn't say that. It said invention or discovery, right? And then the Congress in 1952 actually went further than that and says, if you're not listening, I'm going to say it again. And in Section 100, I'm going to define invention to mean invention or discovery in the disjunctive. And it was like, are you listening? I'm going to put it in a second time. Okay, and the reason why it was clear that they did that is because they were trying to overrule Funk Brothers, which Funk Brothers, I believe, is probably the case you were talking about. and that was like root nodule bacteria or something that you could mix. And if you mixed it, they didn't fight each other. They didn't impinge on each other, and so you could get a really good something to grow plants in. And so they said, no, if you identify a bunch of different bacteria, you mix it together, and there's a really great result, which is for the first time you can grow plants that you couldn't grow before. They said that's not inventive, but that was a 1948 case by Justice Douglas. So then it looked like in the 1952 Act, they were actually trying to overrule Funk Brothers, and there's legislative history to that effect. However, it never caught on, and so everyone somewhere lost the script and forgot that invention or discovery was in the disjunctive, and then you get these other cases, you know, the Parker v. Fluke and Gottschalk and these other cases that came along in the 101 space saying an invention, you know, these discoveries or things that include mathematical formulas were not inventions. But then you get to Mayo, but then the big one is Myriad. It was Myriad, okay, Myriad Genetics, and that was a breast cancer case. That was for the BRCA1 and BRCA2 gene. And that was a huge invention because they found out how to isolate BRCA1 and BRCA2, which would be a diagnostic to find out whether you're at big risk for getting breast cancer. And that took a lot of research, a lot of time, a lot of money, as we've talked about. And that's where Justice Thomas made his most shocking statement ever made by the U.S. Supreme Court, saying that even groundbreaking, brilliant discoveries are not inventions, even though the word discoveries is in the Constitution, and it was twice in the 1952 Patent Act in the disjunctive.
That was a breathtaking statement.
I couldn't believe you said that.
And I've said, you know, if you're going to, this is not a particularly difficult statute to read. It's only one sentence long. And if you're going to opine on it, maybe you ought to read it. You know, I mean, because it says right there, discoveries are patent eligible.
What does the word "or" mean?
Well, and that's why I
B.
said I think it's the decision not to allow for that antibiotic resistant discovery to move forward and get patent protection, probably the right legal decision based on a series of terrible, incorrect rulings by the Supreme Court that have led us to that conclusion that ignore the statute and actually ignore the Constitution. But, you know, what's the patent office to do? You know, but so even if that is the correct legal outcome, Congress needs to step in and say, okay, that can't be the outcome that we are willing to tolerate, because that then means that we don't have that developed. Because if you can't own it, you can't invest in it. And that's true if it's a gadget that's sold on QVC, but it is certainly true if it's going to take $2 to $12 billion, depending on the drug and the complexity of the science, to invent it and then go through all the clinical trials required and then take it to market. You can't invest. And I know the other side says, oh, it's not 2 to 12 billion. Like, pick a number. I don't care what your number is. You know, divide that or multiply it by 10%. Okay, so 200 million to a bill, whatever number you want to use, I don't care, because the answer is still the same. You can't spend 200 million, you can't spend 100 million, you can't spend 50 million, you can't spend 100,000 if you can't own it, because the minute it hits the market and somebody can copy it, they don't have to recoup that 100,000 or 12 billion, whatever the number is, and they are going to be able to sell it less than you, and you're going to. It's a fast way for innovators to go out of business.
Sure. And then, you know, we know from the Constitution that the judiciary is not supposed to make law. Okay? The judiciary is supposed to interpret and apply the law, not make the law. Now, we've seen the judiciary time after time have judicial spread, where the judiciary just can't help itself and decides it wants to make the law. And we've got two huge monoliths right now of, I'd say, unconstitutional judicially created law. One is in the patent eligibility space, which we've talked about a lot, and the other one is in the judicially created non-statutory doctrine of obviousness type double patenting. Now, for the second one, you wonder if somebody's kicking themselves in the leg for naming it judicially created non-statutory. Maybe they should have come up with a better name, because that is a huge admission against interest. And of course, and it's still in the books, but the courts don't even mind referring to it. And so we've got these two huge judicial doctrines, which you can't find anywhere in the statutes, not in the Constitution. The courts have made them up. They've made them up, at least for patent eligibility, going up to the Supreme Court, for the judicially created doctrine going up to the Federal Circuit. And what are we supposed to do about that? So, of course, now we've had wonderful advocates, pro-patent people working for years on the Hill trying to introduce legislation to dial that back, and they've dialed that back with PERA to 2023 and then 2025, which is the Patent Eligibility Restoration Act, which was supposed to dial back the unconstitutionality of these judicial cases on patent eligibility and go back to the Constitution, go back to the roots, go back to our forefathers, go back to the 1952 Patent Act, which is where we're supposed to be, and that's all great. But then Congress can't help itself. So then Congress, in the very end, in the 2025 Act, slips in this Section 4A into PERA bill, and that says nothing in here will affect the interpretation of judicially created doctrine of obviousness type double patenting. So somehow they brought this second monolith into the statute on the first monolith. And so they're using the second one as a sacrificial lamb to fix the first doctrine. And that's not okay. Okay, we need both of those doctrines for fixed. Not one can't be the sacrificial lamb for the other one.
Yeah, and we heard over the last couple of days how that actually got into the bill, and that there is no intention to say anything about obviousness type double patenting. And we all know how that's going to get used.
Sure.
Well, once it's in the statute, now you can't say, well, because right now you could say, well, Congress has never ratified obviousness type double patenting. They've never considered it. They've never been asked to do it. And now if this passes with that in it, well, that argument goes away, and it starts to look an awful lot like an authorization. Whether it is or not, that's how the courts are going to interpret it.
It's an indirect ratification. And it'll be the first time that Congress has mentioned the word judicially created doctrine of ODP. And not only that, it's even worse than that. Okay, if that's possible. Okay, what's worse than that is now you've got a doctrine that Congress, that the courts have been running amok with without any authorization in the Constitution or from Congress. And the Congress is retroactively saying, putting a Band-Aid on it and saying, we don't mind that you have made up law just on your own for the past how many years. We're just going to say that's okay.
Well, in a lot of spaces, obviousness type double patenting doesn't really matter. In the life sciences space, it matters enormously.
It's critical. We get those
all
rejections
the time.
Every single office action. Sometimes we'll get an office action that will have 2 or 3 pages of novelty and obviousness rejections and 15 pages of double patenting rejections. And we have to sit there and work through all these double patenting rejections, and some of them are over early legacy cases, like that were filed 10 years ago, 5 years ago, a long time ago, and they're not even in the same family. And I also get frustrated by the argument that we don't have to worry about judicially created ODP anymore because GATT fixed that. GATT did not, let me just say it really clearly, GATT did not fix judicially created ODP, did not fix it, because we get rejections over cases that don't have the same priority date.
And, I fundamentally don't think anybody really understands obviousness type double patenting, and that's not an indictment. It's like, how could you possibly? Because it is a judicially created doctrine, what happens is you get to make it up as you go along, and that's exactly how this has grown up. So it is just, it feels to me like almost a Monty Python type skit, when you say, well, obviousness type double patenting has nothing to do with obviousness. And it's like, okay, well, that's just crazy. That's just stupid. That can't be. And if it actually was tethered to obviousness, then it would have some home in the statute, and you would be able to argue it in a principled way. But because it is untethered to anything other than being made up as you go along, you get these crazy rulings and decisions. And I don't know how you all handle it. I mean, it makes me want to just carve my eyes out with a dull spoon.
Exactly. One of the problems is you can't fix this retroactively. Let's say you get a rejection for double patenting. The only way you're going to get that patent is by submitting a terminal disclaimer. So you submit a terminal disclaimer, and for those who are listening, that means you have to agree to terminate a patent at a certain date that another patent terminates on. So it's a loss of patent term, basically. And so you do that, but then the next case comes out of the federal circuit, and it changes that law. It changes the law that you had to act under when you submitted your terminal disclaimer. Now, terminal disclaimers cannot be withdrawn after the issuance of a patent. So we now have law that says, it's kind of like the courts took a nice pill and they said, okay, we're going to give you a little bit just to calm you down and make you quit complaining about judicially created doctrine. We're going to give you the first one in the family. Okay, we're going to give you the first one, and that one will not get a terminal disclaimer. It'll be the second and third ones, or the follow-on cases that get the terminal disclaimers. But what happens if you had prosecuted these cases before Allergan came out, or before some of these other cases came out, and you already submitted a terminal disclaimer, and the patent already issues? You're just out of luck. What is it? Just out of luck. You're dead. You're stuck with that terminal disclaimer, and it's not fixable.
Well, it's just also proof that patents are not property, and I understand the statute says otherwise. But if patents were property, you would not be changing the rules as you go along. And if you did change the rules as you went along, they would apply prospectively, not retroactively. But in our space, it's always retroactive, and it's, well, this is just what the law always was. That we never got around to telling you what this was, but that's the way it always was. And that's the way it always was when they're overruling the way that it used to be.
If that's the way it always was, we wouldn't have submitted the terminal disclaimer in the case we
in the first place.
We can't take it back now, right?
Yeah. And that's why I pointed out that I just feel like there are all these forces at work that want to do away with patents, that want to whittle away little by little by little, because you can't look at the breadth of the law in this area and in other areas and come away with the conclusion that judges and policymakers believe patents are a property right, that certainty matters, and that they want to encourage innovators to do the hard stuff and invest where required, because they just always, we started out talking, they encourage generics to challenge. They set up a PTAB to challenge. They do all these, they change the rules as you go along. And I don't know at what point that we're going to have like the last straw on the camel's back. And that's going to be hard to prove, right? How do you prove that, well, something didn't happen because of all of this, that lacked investment, so things couldn't move forward? And because you can't prove a negative, what'll wind up happening is it'll take 10 or 20 years of all this bad policy, and then we'll look back and we'll say, hey, did you notice in the 80s and 90s there was a lot more drugs for a lot more treatments, a lot more diagnostics, a lot more of everything, and then over the last 20 years there's a lot less? I wonder what happened. Well, we all know what happened.
Yeah, and it may be in a very perverse way that China is the pressure that changes some of this, because China doesn't have terminal disclaimers. Okay, China has just obviousness. China isn't going through some of the same things, and I'm sure they're watching very, very carefully what's happening in the United States. And maybe they're trying to make a stronger patent system than we have here. And we already know that their research is getting better and better. We know their patents are getting better and better. We see prior art that's cited against our clients' cases, and some of these patents now are pretty well written. They're pretty well written, and they have to be taken seriously. And China is very smart and a very good competitor, and they're watching what we're complaining about.
Yep.
And they may be the ones to fix it, or not go into that trap themselves. We've already seen one of the companies that did an IPO. We haven't had that many IPOs in the pharmaceutical area in 2025, but one of them, I think it was Ascension or Pharmaceuticals, is based both in China and in the United States, and they got both of their drugs approved first in China, and then they're going to the United States. And it's because China has some rules now that says if you get a drug approved first in the United States, you get advantages in terms of patent term extension and some of the other ones, but you have to do it first in China. But they did a U.S. IPO and made $231 million this year, which was impressive in a bad market.
Yeah. Well, let's pivot in the time we have remaining to talk about, well, why does this matter? You've had a situation where a lot of these wonderful drugs that we've been talking about really matter to you. You want to fill in the gaps there?
Of course. And this isn't the first time I've talked about this, but I'm a cancer survivor myself. So I talked about it at Bio a number of years ago, and I've actually been on another podcast on it. So I'm a breast cancer survivor. So, and I went through, I can tell you a little bit about my story because that tells you how important drugs are. That's a personal story. We all have personal stories. I hope that you don't have one exactly like mine, but you may have one that's a family member. You may have one that's, a relative or something. And so, thank goodness this was about 20 years ago. So I'm way past it now. I'm over it. I'm recovered and it's gone. But going through that was transformational, because, I actually just looked in the mirror one day and I saw this piece of skin that was like pulled up like a divot. It was kind of pulled up. I actually saw my cancer in the mirror. Okay, that's how I found it. So it was a divot that was kind of pulled up right at the cleavage point here. And I thought, that's weird. I'd never seen that before. And so I kind of, closed my eyes, felt around a little bit. There was a lump there. So I thought, and it was the size of like a small marble or something, right about here. And so I thought, I haven't seen that before. But, women get fibroids. That's not really uncommon. So I thought, well, I'll give it a week or two to go away. We'll see what happens. So I was feeling it every day to see, but it just sat there. So I knew what the rules are. The rules are if you have a lump, you have to go get it checked. So I called up and I went to the local hospital, got a mammogram, and I was actually making a joke about it because mammograms are not fun. They like squeeze you to pieces. They are not fun. Okay, and I was making a joke and saying, don't squeeze those cells. They're going to go popping all over, because I didn't think it was anything. And so after that, they came in the waiting room. They said, well, anytime you have a lump, then you have to get an ultrasound. Of course, they have this thing that they say for each one. Then you have to get an ultrasound. So I was laying on the table, get the ultrasound. I'm literally looking at my watch because I know I have a call coming up. I was with King and Spalding at the time, and so I'm looking at my watch thinking, I got to get back to work. I've got a call coming up. Kind of, can you really hurry up and get this thing done? And I just said, oh well, it's it's water filled, right? That's a fibroid. And then she said, no, this isn't a fibroid. This is solid. So then I go, okay, that wasn't good. Then, and I said, they said this one is going to have to be biopsied. So that was scary. But then their next line that they always tell you is, but 80% of these are not cancerous, you know? They always have their line to make you feel better till you get to the next place. So my next line was, 80% of these are fine, so don't worry about it. And I said, can I get my biopsy today? And they said, no, you know, I think this was on a Monday. They said, no, you can do it on a Wednesday. So I came back on Wednesday. And so when I got in, that's when you get the radiologist, because they're going to come in and do the actual biopsy and get a sample. So then there's a big monitor there that the radiologist is looking at. And when they when they got it, the radiologist got an amazing picture of it on the screen. And that was one of the craziest moments of my life, because I came face to face with my own cancer. I saw it on the screen. And, you know, I'm in science. I've represented pharmaceutical companies for ages. A fibroid is round. This thing looked like a cross between an amoeba and an octopus. So it was thick in the middle, and it had hands coming out. And you got a picture clear as day on the screen of that with all the fingers coming out. And I said to the radiologist, can you tell what that is? I want to say, because I can, you know, that's cancer. And she said, well, you know, I don't like those edges, but you never know. That's the next line. You never know till you get the biopsy, so just go ahead and get the biopsy 2 days later. So then they call back within 24 hours. You also know something's wrong when you get a call from the hospital, any call from the hospital within 24 hours. Okay, then you're on their list, right? So I got the next call back, and they said, you know, we didn't get the results that we thought we were going to get. I already actually knew I had it because I saw it on the screen, so I don't think they were telling me news at that point. And I actually felt bad for the woman who had to call and tell me that, to be honest with you, because I already knew what it was, and she was scared to tell me. And so she said, you have what looks to be high-grade infiltrating ductile carcinoma, and you need to get to an oncologist immediately. You know, so I said, okay, wow. And then the next time you know that you're in trouble is when the hospital on its own calls you the next day and said, did you call a doctor yet? You know, you don't get a follow-up call very usually. So I got the follow-up call. Anyway, I did my own research. I found a doctor to go to. And that started on a saga, because I didn't have baby cancer. I had real cancer that I had to go through, and I ended up with 29 doses of chemotherapy, 40 radiation treatments, and 3 surgeries to get rid of this. But here I am 20 years later, right?
Because of innovators.
Because of innovators, yeah. So then I said to myself, wow, I need to figure out what these patents were, you know, because I'm a patent attorney. So the drugs that I was on adriamycin, cyclophosphamide, Taxol, and Herceptin. Those are my 4 drugs. These drugs saved my life. You know, they saved my life. And these things are personal, you know. There's the patent.
Take your time.
Good story, though.
It is a good story. Good that you are here, number one, and number two. You know, my mother passed away in 2012. She was my best friend, and she died of cancer. And
you had tears the other day.
Yeah, the only good thing about it was she didn't linger.
Yeah.
But you know, it's touched everybody's life.
Sure.
You know, and that's why when Henry was here, Henry Haddad, and we were talking to him, I asked him, "Are we going to cure this during our lifetime?"
Yeah.
And we're getting closer and closer with a lot of cancers, and he was optimistic that, you know, there will be a lot of cancers that if we can't really cure them, that we might be able to turn them into long-term treatable, and you'd maybe die of something else rather than the cancer. And the cancer science has gotten so good, so much better, but it still kills too many people that we love.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely. So this is the patent on the red devil, And it's interesting, this patent is only 7 or 8 pages long. You know how long anti-cancer patents are today. 7 or 8 pages long. It was filed in 1958. So I went on a trek to find out who these people were and to see if they were still alive. Because I think patents are personal, and that's a message that I want all your viewers and all your listeners to take home. Patents are personal. When you take an antibiotic, or you take a drug for hypertension, or you take a GLP-1 drug, or you take any drug, remember, there are a group of people who created that drug, and it's a small number of people. It's probably somewhere between 4 and maybe up to 10 people. That's it. And they have personally touched your lives. Next one is cyclophosphamide. Cyclophosphamide has a very, very dark story. And I think, we're in life sciences. We should relish the stories of the drugs that save our lives, okay? Those are stories. Those are memories. Those are things that make a difference in everybody's life. So for cyclophosphamide, it had a very dark past. It started out in World War I as nitrogen gas, as a bad gas, basically toxic gas to kill people in World War I. Okay, and the scientists figured out that if it kills people, it would probably kill cancer, but it was way too toxic. So then they made a prodrug of nitrogen mustard gas after World War II. And so they dialed down the toxicity, but then they kept the activity. And so cyclophosphamide is a drug now that's not quite as toxic. It gets to your liver, it breaks down into toxic materials, which then are absorbed disproportionately in your cancer cells. And so that's how it works, okay? But it goes all the way back to nitrogen gas, mustard gas, basically, from World War I because it was so toxic. But what kind of a story? Again, this patent has saved so many lives. It's only about 10 pages long. And it's still in business today, saving lives, just like adriamycin is, okay? Then the third one, Taxol. Okay, we all know the story of Taxol. Okay, Taxol was first filed in, I think, 1989. Okay, so one of the stories about adriamycin is that adriamycin is a natural product. Okay, adriamycin was isolated from a bacteria in Italy, and they saw this bacteria that was bright red, and they wanted to know what the bright red stuff was. So they isolated the bright red stuff. It's naturally occurring. It would not be patentable under the patent eligibility as it's being used by Supreme Court today. So if Myriad was in effect back then, I would be dead. I wouldn't have this podcast because I would never have gotten this drug.
So that's one of the starkest things that we can talk about and highlight and underscore and stamp. It's shocking that that's the case, but it is. That life-saving drug would not exist today. It couldn't exist today.
I put in AI. This also showed me how powerful AI is also, because the first time I looked for the adriamycin patent, it took me about a week to find it. So last night I just put it back into AI. It had it in like 5 seconds. I said, what was the first patent on adriamycin? There it is. So AI is working pretty well. Natural product would not be patented. I would not be alive if patent eligibility law was what it was back then. And then when I asked the people in New York who actually knew the folks at Pharmatalia, I said, I have one really important question to ask you. I said, would the people at Pharmatalia, would they have taken the time to come up with a new anti-cancer antibiotic if they thought that it wasn't patentable subject matter in the United States? I actually asked that question. And he started laughing. He said, of course not. He said they spent all day talking about how they were going to get a patent in the United States and open the U.S. market for adriamycin. Okay, this drug was made based on their confidence that it would be patentable in the United States, even though it was made in Italy. That's a huge story.
It is, but we all know that that's true. We all know that if the market in the United States doesn't exist, that people don't pursue these things. And that's just the reality of the situation. And it's great that, China's developing their patent laws. It's great that the European Union is moving forward in a more pro-patent way. But the reality is the whole rest of the world could be pro-patent, and it's not going to matter for these drugs unless the U.S. changes its course.
No. So our patent eligibility law not only affects the United States, but it affects researchers all over the world, and that's a really bad thing. And then for the Taxol, this is interesting for patent eligibility also. And I brought these patents just because I wanted to actually show you these are life-saving patents. As you know, Taxol, it was a naturally occurring product. It's found in trees, the yew tree. But it was found in 1989 after Diamond versus Chakrabarty. Okay, the scientists then had gotten the idea that naturally occurring materials are not patentable. So between adriamycin and Taxol, there was a change in the law in the U.S. Supreme Court. So they could not get a patent on Taxol, even though it's incredibly useful. It was in a tree. It saved countless lives. So what they had to do was they got a patent on a method for producing Taxol that came from Florida State University, and it was Robert Holton. So Robert Holton figured out how to make a synthesis of Taxol because it's a very complicated molecule. BMS licensed it in, I think, from Florida State, so this is a university invention. And it was protected based on method of manufacture patents because the law had changed in the United States. And I think there's no reason for that. I think there was every reason why Taxol should have had as much patent protection as adriamycin because it saved as many lives, and it's because of the march of that. And then we've got the last one, which I don't think I've got the patent for, but that's Herceptin. Now, Herceptin came from Genentech. That's a newer drug. That's also a life-saving drug. But you don't have to have cancer to be able to appreciate the drugs that you take, okay? And I really encourage everybody who's watching, everybody who's in this room, take the time to look at the patent that covers the drugs that you're taking and realize that patents are personal. Patents are personal. That is a personal relationship between those people who are the inventors of the drug you took and you. And don't think for a minute that if you're just taking an antibiotic or something, that really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because we have antibiotics. It used to be that you would die of that, and all these drugs that we're treated with now, we would have died from. Now we live from. And so I urge you, find out who saved your life, find out who improved your life, who increased your quality of life, and just say a quiet thank you.
Well, and I'll take it one step further. Those are the types of stories that resonate on Capitol Hill. And those are the types of stories that aren't told nearly enough. I think all of us have a story, and a story that can resonate and break through and not just make this a legal issue. This is a human issue that the other side can't compete against. Because one, the facts are on our side. Two, the emotion is on our side. And three, we don't have to make stuff up. We just have to tell the truth.